Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader. Today I will continue and finish the story The Butterfly Bee Lady and the Bee by Ig Oliver. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I have included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Wait, said Bramley, who is Steatoda? I am Steatoda, came a voice from the dark. Everyone turned quickly to where the voice had come from. The butterflies all gasped with shock and fear at hearing the sudden voice and flew back up to the rafters to safety, their wings drumming suddenly, causing a breeze in the loft, making swirls of dust from the floor rise up. Bramley stood his ground again, but ushered Bee behind him. Now he stood in front of Bee and the Natterer's bat. The dust swirled around, blocking their vision for a moment. It slowly began to settle, and as it did, it revealed Steatoda standing right in front of them. Bramley felt Bee's hand squeeze his arm, not this time for reassurance, but out of fear. The spider was standing before them, her reddish legs still and silent, and 8 black eyes staring at them, close enough for them to see their own reflections. Don't worry, came her voice suddenly, in an unreassuringly slow, smooth, calculated way. We have made a deal not to harm you with the bat. I'm more interested in where you found your light. Bee? I could use a light like this. Bramley knew of spiders and knew they couldn't be trusted. But at that moment, he wanted answers. He stood his ground. I don't know of any light, he replied. Steatoda moved to her left, suddenly, in a quick but silent scurrying action, keeping her eyes on Bramley, and stopped just as suddenly. It's there in your chest, she said, as her thin, spindly leg rising as though to point. Bramley put his hand on his chest and felt in his fur. At first, he felt nothing, but suddenly he felt a small object embedded on his skin under his fur. It was sticky to touch. He looked closer, and there he saw the missing piece of golden pollen he thought he had lost from his pocket. It had gotten stuck with honey in his fur, but it had grown and now resembled a small golden crystal. But more worrying was the fact that it had grown into his body, into his chest. Bee looked at the pollen crystal. Her eyes widened and sparkled with flashes of green. There was something meaningful in this to her. She wanted to touch it, but resisted. It's magic, she whispered. Bramley put his hand over the crystal. How do I get it out? What shall I do? Steatoda moved a little closer, but the Natterer's bat shuffled forward and Steatoda backed away. She muttered, I can help you take it off. I have some venom that would numb the pain, and I can remove it for you. I could help you. Again, the Natterer's bat moved forward, and again Steatoda moved backwards. But this time he spoke. Now is not the time for this, Bramley. It seems to me that whatever it is that made the light also saved you and gave you the strength to live. But right now we have more important things to worry about. We need to find a way out. I can sense there are other forces around us. Something is not right, and I fear there is danger coming. Bee, Bramley, the butterfly family, and even Steatoda had stopped talking to listen to the bat. All started thinking of an answer of how to get out of the loft when, unexpectedly, the Natterer's bat became agitated and started moving around, mumbling to himself. Unexpectedly, he stretched his wings and flew very quickly to the top of the loft ceiling and started to make strange clicking noises, flying erratically in wonky zigzags through the darkness. "What's wrong with him?" whispered Bee into Bramley's ear, as they both tried to follow his flight, but not such a quiet whisper that Steatoda couldn't hear. "He's listening to something," she said as she too peered upwards. "I've watched him do this before, many times." After a moment, the bat landed again on the floor. He sneezed loudly as he came to rest in front of Bramley and Bee, letting loose a spray of phlegm through the air, which mostly went in everyone's faces. "That's disgusting," Steatoda gasped, wiping gluey globules from her face. Natterer wiped his nose again, oblivious to what he had done. Instead, he breathed in deeply. His chest rattled as though he was about to sneeze again. Everyone turned away and covered their faces. The bat looked at them for a moment, wondering what they were doing. "There was something outside," he said, looking around at everyone with their backs to him. Slowly, they turned and faced him, still expecting another soaking. There was an awkward silence for a moment, as though an apology was expected, but nothing came. The bat repeated what he had said, but elaborated. "There was something outside. I could hear them and feel their presence. I think they're dragonfliers. There were at least 5 of them. They were watching this human home. It's very strange. I've never sensed them before at night time, but they have left now." All night, the Dragonflyer scouts had been observing the empty human house, probing it to see if there were any indications or clues to the whereabouts of Bramley or his butterflies. There had been no sign of any bats flying in and out or near the house during the night, and now the sun was rising steadily into the blue sky. "We must report back to the Queen," said one of the scouts, signaling to the other scouts. They grouped together and headed back towards the hills and the distant forest. Bramley sat on the floor, slumped, suddenly feeling downhearted. Bee knelt by him. "What's wrong, Daddy? Are you ill?" "No," said Bramley. He looked around at everyone's faces. "They're looking for us," he said solemnly. He briefly retold the story of his escape from the tree, how his home had been destroyed, that dragonfliers were trying to find him and his children. He told them how he'd been left to care for them by Bee Lady and the promise he had made, as well as about the golden pollen. He now realized that it had more magical powers than he had first thought. Bee stroked Bramley's head. "It's okay, Daddy. We're safe in here." Bramley looked into Bee's eyes. He could now clearly see her mother, Bee Lady, in her face and eyes. He thought of the promise he had made to the Bee Lady to protect Bee and her siblings. "No," said Bramley abruptly as he stood up again, regaining his resolve. "We have to escape and get out of here. We have no food and no water, and the dragonfliers will be back and find us eventually. We'll be trapped." "And how do you suppose to do that?" retorted Steatoda. "As I see it, only you and I can fit through the pipe." She hesitated, thinking. "Together we could escape. And yes, you and we could get help." "No," said Bramley. "We're all going to get out together. There has to be a way." "The only way out is through the door in the floor," said the bat. Bramley looked around again into the faces of his 91 children. They looked at him for reassurance. He looked at the bat. He was looking discouraged. He turned and looked at the spider, Steatoda. She was preening her legs, scraping away strands of silk web on her legs. "Steatoda," Bramley said, watching her go through her motions of discarding the silk web. "Your silk is strong, isn't it?" She stopped, looked at Bramley, and smiled. "It's strong enough to tie a bat to the ground," she said, looking across at the natterer. The bat turned towards the spider, hearing what she said, and showed his fangs and teeth to her. his face suddenly screwed up and distorted. "The same way my teeth could cut you in half," he replied, glaring at her. "Wait," said Bramley. "Now's not the time to fight amongst ourselves. We needs each other. Show me's the door in the floor. I have an idea." The bat showed Bramley and the rest, as they congregated around the door in the floor. "We can't lift it. It looks too heavy," said Bee. Bramley smiled at her. "Steatoda, we're going to need your strong silk," Bramley said. Moving towards her, "Can yous make 93 strands of silk and attach them to the door?" "I could spin my silk all day, but it will take some time to make that many." "Good," said Bramley. "Get started nows, and give a strand to each of my children when it's tied to the door. Make it longs enough to reach the beams above." Bee and the rest of the butterflies started chatting amongst themselves. Realizing what Bramley had in mind, the bat spoke with caution. "You want to try to lift the door using the silk? It won't be strong enough. We are not strong enough." Bramley looked at Natterer. "Do yous remember watching me's bringing and carrying all these children through the night? I did it because I had to's. I found the strength. Use me and the butterflies. We will find the strength. We'll do it. We's only needs to lift it a little to's get through." Back in the forest, in its darkest, furthest most place, where the sun was barely visibly through its thick foliage, just letting a few scattered beams of light through to strike the damp, moss-ridden ground to give some visibility, which was strewn with rotting tree, limbs covered in yellow, sickly-looking funguses, stood Sindina near the black pool of oily, stagnant water. She was talking into the pool. "Yes, my sister, the time is near. We shall have—" When all of a sudden the scouts swiftly returned, settling on a rock near to the pool. Sindina stopped mid-sentence. "Well, what news do you bring me?" Sindina commanded. One of the scouts moved forward, his head moving around, turning on its side as though cowering. "We saw no one, my queen, no bats, no creatures. It was quiet," he said, bowing his head lower. Sindina looked across at Redwing. "Prepare, my dragonfliers. We leave for the human house. They're in there, hiding. We must go now before they move again." It was getting late in the day. Steatoda had been spinning her silk all day, and now she had just finished her 93rd strand. She was tired now. The job was completed. "I'm exhausted," she said, as Bramley thanked her and took the last strand of silk web and flew up to the loft ceiling. All the butterflies were perched along the wooden beam. Bee was standing with her brothers and sisters, and the Natterer's bat was balancing precariously, using his wings to balance and steady his bony legs. "On my signal," Bramley shouted, "we all take the strain and pull the web tight. Then on my second signal, we all fly, one by one, over and under the beam, pulling the silk around the beam." Just at the moment when Bramley was about to signal, Steatoda appeared, swinging through the air and landing on the thatching next to the Natterer's bat. "Here," she said, dangling in front of him. "Take this. It's double-strength silk. I wouldn't want yours to break, and then you would blame me for this crazy idea not working." The bat smiled at her. "If this works, we'll have stories to tell our children." "We're ready!" shouted the Natterer. Bramley held his silk strand. "Take the strain," he called, and everyone pulled on their silk. "Pull!" shouted Bramley. "Pull!" There was a sudden creaking sound as the door in the floor lifted slightly. A line of light appeared along the opening, and then a gush of wind sucked back through the gap that had appeared, pulling the door to close back on itself. "Pull harder!" shouted Bramley. The door moved open again, the draft sucking at it, trying to pull it back. Bramley shouted again, "Fly! Fly now!" The Natterer's bat flapped his wings and rose into the air, followed shortly by Bee. Then one by one the rest of the butterflies took off, taking the strain and beating their wings, all 91 of them. The noise was loud and incredible. They all dropped around the back of the beam, pulling the silk tauter. The door creaked again, and the air gushed out. The door rose sluggishly. This time the air was working for them, pushing it up. "It's working!" Bramley cried out. "Fly harder!" The door now rose more. "Tie the silk around the beam!" Again Bramley shouted. They all flew harder, circling around the beam, whilst reaching out to tie their ends firmly to the wooden beam. They tied the silk around the beam. Steatoda scurried down the lengths of silk strands, weaving more silk thread between them, strengthening them and forming a massive web. "Bee!" Bramley called out. "Lead everyone through the door." Bee flew down to the opening and hovered in the entrance, while she ushered each of her siblings through the gap. The Natterer landed with a bump on the floor next to Bee, shortly followed by Bramley. "I knew it would work," the bat said, smiling at Bramley. They both looked through the gap to the room below, where the others were flying around. "We must go. I'm not sure this web will hold. This through draft is strong," said Bramley. The Natterer turned and looked back into the attic. It was a good home, he said. He then saw Steatoda still spinning her web. He shouted up to her, "Spider, you must leave. It won't hold." She stopped and looked back down at them. "I'm not leaving," she shouted. "This is my home. I told you my silk is strong enough to tie a bat down, so it can hold a door open. Don't forget, we still have a deal, so go." Bramley looked at the bat. "What deal?" The bat shrugged his shoulders. Bramley turned and shouted up to thank Steatoda and bid her farewell and good luck. Then Bee, Bramley, and the bat slipped through the door. Outside the human home, Sindina had gathered her dragonflowers and positioned some of them in the tree and the long grass around the house, and some lying in wait on the thatched roof. It was getting late, and the sun was already starting to set over the hills in the distance. It was beginning to get dim. The summer light was fading, and the cool breeze flowing over the tall grass was getting stronger. Sindina was standing on the corner of the roof when Redwing settled next to her. He was about to speak when Sindina raised her hand. "Shh, quiet. Can you hear that?" she said. Redwing listened. Suddenly, a sound came resonating through the thatch. A muffled sound of wings beating hard. Sindina chuckled to herself. "They're in there. They're moving." "There's only one way out, my queen," said Redwing. "Out of the chimney," he said, pointing to the top of the house. "Go," she said. "Take your men and wait. I want Belize's daughter alive. Kill the rest." Redwing flew up and above the chimney, taking some of the dragonflowers with him. They hovered above. Sindina flew down to the side of the house to see if she could see into the house, holding her staff tightly in both hands. "You didn't think I would leave my daughter alone and unprotected, did you, sister?" came a voice from behind. Sindina froze. The wind caught her hair and blew it sideward. Green strands suddenly shimmering in the last rays of the sun as it set. Her long green dress flapped in the breeze, and a green glow slowly emanated at the top of her staff. Sindina raised her head and looked up at the top of the house, still with her back to Bee Lady. "Ha!" she laughed. "You're too late." She spun around, pointing the staff in the direction of Bee Lady. "It's been a long time, sister. Or are you my sister? My sister died a long time ago. You are an abomination," Sindina hissed. Bee Lady gently and gracefully flapped her wings, her body silhouetted against the last throes of light, showing the worn and aging edges of her wings. You know who I am. I am your sister, and I have come to take my daughter to fulfill her destiny. Sindina hissed again. There will be no destiny. She lunged her staff towards Bee-Lady. Bramley, Bee, and all the butterflies now followed Natterer through the empty house. They came to a room with a hole in the wall, the fireplace. The Natterer bat led the way, stopping in front of the fireplace. He turned to Bramley. There's a strong updraft. You don't need to fly, just let the wind pull you up. The butterflies looked nervous and afraid, and all started to voice their concerns. Suddenly, Bee flew to the front and faced them. Don't worry, my sisters and brothers. I'm sure it's safe. She looked at Bramley and smiled. I'll go first. Wait, said Bramley. But before he could say more, Natterer spoke. It'll be okay, Bramley. I'll follow her. You stay here and make sure your children all go up after us. I'll come to the window when I'm through and show you I'm okay, reassured Bee. Bee stood backwards into the mouth of the fireplace. Her wings suddenly ruffled in the wind. Then suddenly her feet lifted off the ground, and in a whisper she was gone. The bat hobbled into the mouth of the fireplace and turned to Bramley, smiling. Don't worry, I'll be okay. But suddenly his face changed. His face rapidly contorted to a snarl. Shadows appeared on the wall above the fireplace. Bramley switched his gaze from the bat to the shadows. Two shadowy forms on the wall embraced in a struggle. One was a butterfly. One was a... Bramley turned around quickly. There, through the window, he saw Bee-Lady. She was struggling with what seemed to be a dragonfly, holding a long wooden staff. He flew to the window. His hand struck against the pane of glass. He watched as two more dragonflies came behind Bee-Lady and grabbed her wings. Bramley watched in horror as the dragonflies pulled Bee-Lady to the ground. Bramley yelled, No! Bee was propelled up the dark chimney. She looked upwards as the light at the end came closer and closer. Suddenly, with a burst of energy from the draft, she was released into the open sky, right into the clutches of Redwing. I have someone who wants to see you, Redwing murmured into Bee's ear, as he held her tightly, pulling her higher into the darkening sky. Bee tried to struggle, but Redwing was too powerful, and she has something special in mind for you. Just at that moment, a sudden jolt sent Bee tumbling out of control into a free fall, and a loud shriek of pain came from Redwing as Natterer's bat intentionally collided at full speed into Redwing, sending them both into spinning through the air. Bramley flew from the window towards the fireplace, his mind in shock at seeing Bee-Lady and her probable imminent demise. As he did, he beckoned to his butterfly family to follow. You must get out now. Follow me, he said, this not knowing what could be waiting outside, but knowing it would be better to fly and try to escape, rather than being trapped inside the house. Bramley sped up the chimney and burst into the sky. A full moon greeted him rising above the solitary tree. He looked around, and the sky was full of dragonflies circling overhead. He saw Bee lying on the roof of the house and flew down to her. Are you hurt? He said as he landed next to her. No, I'm all right, she said, just a bit winded. Bee, you must go. Lead your brothers and sisters away from here. Go now. At that moment, the first butterflies flew out of the chimney, heading straight towards the dragonflyer's trap. Bee looked on in desperation as the impending slaughter of her family was about to happen. All of a sudden, a loud clicking rang through their ears. A Natterer's bat shot past them, and then upwards towards the dragonfliers. This was shortly followed by two more bats, and then another two, shadowed by two more. There was clicking all around them. Natterer shouted down, "We'll clear the path, Bee." "Go, Bee. Lead them to safety," Bramley said. He grabbed Bee and hugged her. "Go, my daughter." He kissed her on the cheek and then pushed her away. "Go now." Bee looked at Bramley. "What? Where are you going?" "I have to do something. I have to go now." "Go now, please," he repeated. "Take care of my children." Bramley quickly turned and was gone. As Bramley flew over the side of the house, he could see Bee Lady in the grass, held by dragonfliers. Standing in front of her was who he had guessed to be Sindina. She was old and worn, her face wrinkled and full of hate. Her staff positioned to strike at Bee Lady. He had to stop her. Then, from nowhere, with a powerful blow, a sharp dagger hit Bramley in the back. The pain shot through his whole body. His breath stopped, and he fell back against the wall of the house. He managed to turn to see his attacker. Redwing hovered over him, his face torn and cut, his wings shredded. "You won't escape me this time, Bee," he said, readying himself to plunge a finishing blow to Bramley. But before he could, there was a loud clicking and a shadow above. Again, Natterer's bat smashed into Redwing. They went tumbling in a deathly embrace into the dense grass. Bramley breathed in. Suddenly, the pain subsided, but everything around him had slowed down. He looked into the sky above. Butterflies, bats, and dragonfliers were in a slow dance of death. He felt helpless. He had failed to protect the ones he loved. He looked around and saw Sindina, raising her arms to strike Bee Lady. Then, in the distance, he saw what he thought to be a dark cloud approaching his body, moving at the speed with a droning sound of 1,000 bees. Bramley pushed himself away from the wall and sped towards Sindina. Everything became clear, as did Sindina. She thrust the staff into Bee Lady's chest, screaming at her and demanding, "Give me the crystals!" Bramley yelled out, "No!" Bee Lady fell backwards, and anger and pain shot through Bramley's soul. He turned his body and sting towards Sindina. As he sped up, she turned around quickly. Sensing Bramley's approach, she raised her staff again, ready to swipe at Bramley, laughing and shouting madly, "Stupid Bee!" A sudden shock of colored light sprang like a laser from Bramley's chest into Sindina's eyes. She screeched, and Bramley's sting struck her in her heart. At that moment, Sindina stood with her mouth open, wide as though to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. Stunned, her eyes were blackened, and her arms flung open wide as she fell backwards. Bramley hovered, his heart beating hard, its sound pounding around his body. The adrenaline overpowered any pain and his wings in slow motion as he watched Sindina fall to the ground. Bramley slowly regained his senses and flew towards where Bee Lady was lying. The dragonfliers had gone. He gently landed next to her and put his arms around her and pulled her head to his chest. She was still with no life. He looked up at the sky. It was full of bees swarming all around. The dragonfliers were being hunted down and were desperately trying to fly away. Across the meadow, in the long grass, he saw 2 dragonfliers dragging what could only be Sindina's body into the distant trees. Bramley looked down at Bee Lady. He felt his body draining and felt cold. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "Why did yous come back, my beautiful butterfly?" Bee Lady's eyes slowly opened, peering up at Bramley. "Butterfly?" She softly spoke. "What butterfly?" Bramley thought he'd lost her. He felt warm again for a moment as he held her, but the coldness came back, his body telling him that his life was draining away. How did yous find us?" Bramley asked Bee Lady, still holding her tightly. Bee Lady looked up at Bramley. "It was time to return to give my daughter her future. I couldn't find you, so I went to the hive, but it had been destroyed. I knew there was something wrong, so I sent searching in the woods. I found the bees hiding in the woods. Their new queen gave me an envelope Inside was a letter telling how the old queen had you secretly followed to watch over you. She knew that you were in the house, and she knew Sindina was coming for you. She paid with her life. At that moment, the Natterer landed in the grass. He moved slowly over towards where Bramley and Bee-Lady lay. He was scarred across his face, but otherwise in one piece. He was shortly followed by the new queen bee, who had brought her bees to fight off the dragonflies. "My children, are they safe?" Bramley worriedly asked the Natterer. "Yes, they're all safe. They all got away." "And Bee?" "Yes," came the voice as Bee appeared slowly, coming to rest next to Bramley. Bee-Lady looked up at Bee. "My daughter," she whispered. Bee looked at Bramley. He nodded. "This is your mother, Bee." "My child, this is not how I wanted you to meet me. I'm sorry. I knew Sindina would try to find you, so I tried to leave a false trail. I left you with Bramley. He was the only one I trusted." Her voice began to falter. Bee-Lady put her hands into her pockets and brought out shining gold pollen crystals and placed them into Bee's hands. They glowed momentarily. "You must put them in your dress pockets and keep them there. Do not take them out. Place Buddleia pollen with them until the new moon appears. They are your future and your past memories. They are the last ones." Bee-Lady turned to Bramley. "You look tired, Bramley. You're pale." The queen bee looked at Bramley. "Where's your sting, Bramley?" Bramley looked back over his shoulder to where he last saw Sindina. "It's in a necessary place," he said, turning back to look at the queen. Bee-Lady knew straight away what this meant to a bee. "What have you done, Bramley? Why?" Bramley smiled down at Bee-Lady. "For our children, my friend." The tears fell from Bee's face as she realized she was going to lose her dad and her mother. She looked at Bee-Lady. "Mother, take back the pollen. Use them to save yourselves." Bee-Lady shook her head and replied, "It's too late, my daughter. Once they have been placed in my bloodline's hands, they are tied only to them." Bee-Lady looked up to the sky above. Above, a full moon shone down. Her hand touched Bramley's chest, where his heart was. There, to her surprise, a light of many colors appeared faintly through Bramley's fur. She looked at Bramley with sudden intrigue in her eyes. "What's this?" she said, pushing the fur away, revealing the crystal on his chest. The light was weak and fading. Bramley quickly explained how it had got there and the part it had played in saving him. Bee-Lady looked up again at the moon and then turned to Bee. "There's still chance for us, to save your father." Bee rose up quickly, as did the Natterer and the queen. "What do you mean? How?" she implored to her mother. "You must get us to the hills. There's a lake with a waterfall," Bee-Lady replied softly. "We must get there before the moon goes down." The Natterer's bat gently picked up Bee-Lady, and Bee steadied her father Bramley, who was growing weaker by the moment. The queen bee told them to go, but she could not help. She had to take care for her bees and lead them back to safety through the night. The Natterer signaled to his family by clicking. "Don't worry," he said. "My family will guide you through the forest. You'll be safe." The queen bowed her head. "You're a brave bee, Bramley. You're a hero." And at that she sped away. After a while, Bee, Bramley, and Natterer, still carrying Bee-Lady, arrived at the lake. "Over there," Bee-Lady pointed. "Put us down there by those rocks near the waterfall." The Natterer did as he was asked. Bee-Lady again looked up at the moon. "There's still time." Bee was so sad and emotional that she clung to her father, not wanting to let him go. Why are we here, Mother? She asked again. Bee Lady managed to sit up, leaning against a rock for support. It's the only way, my child. You must be brave. Bee Lady beckoned to Bramley. He moved over to her, managing to hover by her side. Do you think you can carry me, Bramley? She asked, smiling at him. I would carry you to the moon if you asked it of me, he replied. He gently lifted Bee Lady into his arms. Bee came over. She still didn't understand. She put her arms around Bramley and her mother and sobbed, Please don't die. Bee Lady put her hand on Bee's cheek and wiped away her tears. This is not the end. This is just another door. You'll understand in time. Bee Lady and Bramley looked over at the bat. Tears were in his eyes. They nodded to him, and he moved gently forward and put his wing around Bee. Bramley spoke. Take cares of my little girl and all my children. He leant forward and kissed Bee on her forehead. A single tear trickled down Bramley's face, and then he lifted into the air. So, where do we go, my queen? Said Bramley. The full moon slowly drifted, its beams reflecting on the still water. Slowly, it positioned itself behind the waterfall's fine spray. As it did, a moon rainbow appeared and arched through the waterfall, disappearing into the depths of the lake. There, Bee Lady pointed at the rainbow. Fly into the rainbow. Bramley found the strength and flew into the colors. Bee Lady hugged Bramley closer as he did. She looked up at him and smiled. My bee, she whispered. Bramley kissed her, and as he did, a rainbow shone from his chest, its colors mixing together with the moon rainbow. The colors surrounded them both, engulfing them, and then their bodies melted away together in stars of colored light. The rainbow tailed away suddenly into the lake and was gone. Bee and Natterer both stood in silence, tears running down their faces. After a moment, Bee turned to Natterer. Take me home. A solitary moth flew high over the lake, its wings flapping erratically as moth's wings do. It circled for a moment and then dropped to the surface, where the rainbow's end had been. The moth seemed to bounce on the water and then flutter away. The view from above revealed in the deep dark water the glow of a crystal stone. They dragged Sindina into the depths of the forest. Her body lay next to the black pool, her hand half submerged. Her staff lay next to her. A single ripple sluggishly floated across its surface. The story ends. Or does it? Blackness is all around, and for a moment there's nothing. It's quiet. Suddenly, a speck of gold appears in the darkness and gets larger and larger. A swirl of colors then fills our eyes. A world of rainbows, gold hills and mountains appear, followed by a rainbow blue lake with a gushing rainbow waterfall, surrounded with rocks and glowing flowers. Slowly, as we are drawn into this world, two faint, opaque spheres with sparkling gold stars and rainbows twirling inside appear near to the rocks and gradually start forming shapes. One, the shape and figure of a butterfly, and the other, a bee. After a moment, Bramley and Bee Lady materialize, their bodies still transparent but moving, both looking down at their own bodies in amazement. Then they look at each other, smiling. Bramley begins to sing to Bee Lady, and as he does, his body changes furthermore. His features slowly change and appear more like a fairy prince, and his wings widen and grow full of colors like a butterfly. He slowly transforms, but keeping his bee-like presence. They touch hands and sing together. Bramley sings, I see you through the lights. You're here with me, can you see? I hear your voice. You're close to me. Bee Lady sings. It's our time. We are free. Come closer. Come next to me. Take my hand. Reach out. And be part of me. You know me. It's really me. You're still you. I know you. We're still the same you and me. Our minds still remained. Bramley looks down again, and his new body, arms and legs. Bramley sings. I feel the light, it's all around. It feels so nice, I can hold your hand. Our lives are here, our world is now, and I can see you clear. You're really here. They both fly up into the air and look at their new world. I never thought this would happen to me. I never thought this would happen to us. This is new. This is magic. This is us. This is great. This is magic. Look at us. This is real, and I'm here with you. They sing together and fly off into the distant rainbow clouds, still singing. I'm still me. You're still you. We've not changed. Well, not that much. This is magic. This is nuts. This is fun. Take my hand. Our lives have just begun. The end. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I have included links where you may find and purchase this book.